debating is that how we can avoid this period of low flow. This segment should also get some water. So that's what is the environmental flow. And we are looking at various options. One option can be that you can have a storage basically created to supply this kind of environmental flow during a period when that segment needs the water. But this is one of the many options which are available, which can be looked at. And there can be, if you have seen that this is the requirement, then how the requirement can be met. Either reduce the power generation, which is being debated that 5% you can reduce and you can let that much water, which is quantified as the environmental flow, to be passing through those sections all the time, minimum flow requirement. So I think there are trade-offs which have to be found out ultimately, and that's the whole debate about how to find out the best trade-offs.
Thank you. And this is really the last question from Suresh.
Thanks. I'm Suresh Babu from WWF India. My question is to Mr. Anish Dey. You talked about the energy policy. My request to you is to comment on the hydropower policy. And because, as you know, it promotes hydropower, it doesn't talk about ecology or environment or the river. So what are the key non-negotiable principles that you would like to see in the hydropower policy so that whatever we were talking about, protection or conservation of the Ganga, is actually implemented? Thank you.
Well, I think the hydropower policy is very limited in its scope. It was, as you mentioned, only a instrument for trying to promote hydropower, and it did not succeed very well simply because it's so limited in its scope. So the first thing to look at it is on a much larger scale, and in terms of the scope of the policy itself, looking at cumulative impact assessment studies, allowing for development only after proper investigations have been done, and not allowing for entitlements to be created by allotting projects, taking money for them, and then figuring out life later. So I think those 2-3 things are very fundamental. The next part, which it tried to attempt by trying to get a part of the money down to the state and the local constituency level so that there is local support which is built up. There's only a direction to it, but there's very little enforcement over there, simply because part of it is the problem is that the national hydropower policy is not binding on the states. So nobody even follows what is written over there. So I think a much more consultative approach to take all of these issues together and finding out why we need the power, what kind of projects we should build, what is the cumulative impact, what is the whole cascade planning which is required, how the environmental flows are going to be managed. That is the vision which we need. Unfortunately, we don't have that today.
Okay, thank you, Anish. I think you more or less summarized the session as well. I'll just have a... Ji, bilkul. वो हम लोग अब कर रहे हैं हम लोग अब करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं तो this is one of the objectives of our JRBMP project as well. This is the method we are following anyway, so you will see some results very, very soon. So I just wanted to have a 10-second summary. I think the overall point here is that yes, we are not against the hydropower projects provided the river condition, the river health is being maintained, provided all the ecological conditions. If not go back to the pristine condition, at least a natural condition of a river is maintained in terms of the connectivity, in terms of the ecological condition. Perhaps a river system is a dynamic system, and whenever you impose a change, it tries to achieve to a new equilibrium. But the question is that whether, as somebody said, the river should look like a river, basically. That's the basic point here. A river should not look like a canal. And if we can at least do that much, that is perhaps the minimum expectation we have from the system, that we should let the river be like a river, and that's all about it. Okay? So I would like to thank very much all the panelists, Dr. Gusai, Dr. Bajpayee and Mr. Goel, and also Mr. Anish Dey for their active participation and comments, and of course the audience for a very, very enthusiastic participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take a very small break, and within 15 minutes we'll start the next session 11:30 sharp. Please cooperate. Okay, welcome back. I think we should begin this session so that we will have sufficient time. Can I request the panelists to please come on the dais. Before I hand over to Dr. Indrajit Dubey and the panelists, I just want to set the scene why we are going to have this particular session. As you all know, this is part of our activity in terms of preparing the Ganga River Basin Management Plan. At some point of time, we felt that we need to review the existing legislations, and also there is a demand coming up from various corners that we should have a comprehensive legislation on the Ganga River Basin Management. We have done some studies and tried to look at whether there is a desirability of such a kind of legislation. I think the panelists would deal on that. I just want to give some background. As you all know, we have gone through the 2 phases of the Ganga Action Plan and also 3 phases of the Yamuna Action Plan. But the perception of the people, the government might say, government departments, ministries might claim that we have achieved partial success or some success, but the perception of the people by and large is that so much investment has been made and on the ground we do not see anything. So while we are doing these kind of studies, we're trying to look at what are the reasons. One of the things that we found that whatever work was done under Ganga Action Plan was done without much data. So that time also we had, like we have National Ganga River Basin Authority, that time also we had Central Ganga Authority, again chaired by the Prime Minister. National Ganga River Authority is also chaired by the Prime Minister. So in terms of the emphasis from the government side, in terms of creating the authority, I don't see any difference. So there is the highest level of authority that is available at that time is also there now. But what is the difference? The difference is that time we did not have the data, so the lack of data was, and the most important thing that we found was the lack of coordination. Many activities are taken up by various departments, state as well as central, various ministries, and by and large these departments, these ministries do not talk to each other on important issues. Okay? So this is one of the gaps that we found in the gap, that there is a lack of coordination, okay? And of course the lack of resources. The amount that is spent on absolute scale looks huge, 2,500 crores, 2,000 crores or whatever. To an ordinary person, to a common person, this 2,500 crores is a huge money. But if you really look at the kind of investment that we really will need, if you have to talk about restoring Ganga or health of the rivers in the Ganga basin, the investments required are very large. And so from that point of view, there was lack of resources. What is actually spent is hardly anything compared to what is required. And that's why we are now at a stage of preparing the Ganga River Basin Environment Management Plan. And our vision is, we have already stated our vision in the document that is circulated, and I presented it yesterday also. And one of the things that we need to work on is to get data and knowledge. So our major emphasis, why we have this summit, this kind of conferences, workshops, basically we are trying to generate information, okay? It comes from various ways, okay? One is whatever measurements that are available to us from the past data, but when we have this kind of meetings, interactions, we also come to know the information, what people think about it, what is their perception, what they think, what went wrong, and so on and so forth. So we are in a position to get that information, and hopefully at the end of this first phase of our Ganga River Basin Environment Management Plan, we will have the data and knowledge that is available as on today. Now, resources, of course, when we say resources, we require two kinds of resources. One is the intellectual resource, and other is the physical resource, and I'll talk about that a little later. Okay, and for this, our vision to get implemented, we need to have policies in place, we need to have appropriate legislations, and we also have to have governance mechanisms. And this is what initially when we took up this project, given to IITs, we thought we will only deal with science and engineering because that is what we are known for. Okay, that is where we can put some. But then later on we realized that preparation of the Ganga River Basin Environment Management Plan is much more than that. Okay, fortunately we had some groups in IITs who were interested in this, and particularly from IIT Kharagpur, where we have the law school, they took the initiative and they said, okay, we will kind of work on what are the kind of legislations that are available, look at what are the gaps, and see if new legislation is required, and if a new legislation is required, we'll make an attempt to draft such a legislation, right? This is why we are here. Okay, so the most appropriate approach for the Ganga River Basin Environment Management Plan that we have outlined here is we require an integrated river basin management plan which follows the principle of managing at the lowest level, lowest appropriate level. That means we are not looking at, in the name of river basin approach, we do not want to centralize. I mean, that's the basic theme that we have here, that we do not, in the name of integrated river basin approach, we do not want to destroy the federal structure that we have. Whatever the states are doing, it's very important. There are certain subjects which are listed under the state list. There are certain, so we do not want to tamper by and large with this because we believe that is something good. So we do want to follow the principle that the actions will be taken at a community level, they will be empowered, yet we need some kind of coordination, right? And that is where we are looking at. Okay. Now if you look at the basin approach, okay, you can see the degree of decentralization on the x-axis and the degree of basin planning approach on the y-axis, and the world over, the left-hand corner of this indicates completely decentralized approach. That means every individual, every community does whatever they want to do in the basin, right? On the other extreme, we have completely centralized approach where there is an authority and that dictates what happens in the entire basin. Okay. World over, if you see it, we have tried to map countries like UK, France, by and large they follow the centralized approach. There is one authority, controls the entire basin kind of thing. But many places it is other way also. The difference is some places the regulations are very strong. We also may have strong regulations, but the implementation of regulation is also very important. So we may have strong regulations, but the implementation is very weak. And what happens in such kind of scenario? So in places like Germany, Meuse, they follow decentralized, they don't have a authority per se, but then their regulations are enforced very effectively and then they see the result. In place like ours, we have a decentralized approach, we do not have a complete, but then the enforcement is very, very weak. And if the enforcement is very weak, what we see the condition of the river in the basin, we are all aware of. Okay. So we have done the mapping of world over how the basin, to what extent the basin approach is followed, where it is decentralized, where it is working, centralized approach, what are the issues